Hello Year 8, I'm hoping to be with you in the lesson at some point. But in the meantime, I've made you a masterpiece because the main part of this lesson is to create your own sort of revision mind-mappy document to show your understanding of the problems really with the Weimar Republic, this new government that had taken over Germany after the First World War. What you've got, you might be able to just see on my iPad, is a PowerPoint slide with a load of information on about the Weimar Republic. That information is also on your student working document. And I want you to create something that might look a little bit like this. Now, of course, your drawing is never going to be as amazing as my fantastic piece of art. Don't be intimidated by how good I am at art. But if you could do your own version of something that I've done here to help you make sense of this, how this whole thing worked, we need to understand that, especially the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic, to be able to understand how it was that Hitler managed to take control. So without further ado, here's my drawing. So, first of all to note is, Germany went from having a Kaiser in charge, one person with all the power, and before 1918, Germany had become one of the most powerful nations in all of Europe. So as far as Germans were concerned, this worked. Having a Kaiser worked. But it didn't work in the end because they lost the First World War, and that was a catastrophe. And that leads us to the Weimar Republic. And then in January 1933, the Weimar Republic is gone, and this fella comes to power. There he is, look, with his silly little moustache. So how did the Weimar Republic work? Well, there's three main parts to it. You've got the president, you've then got the chancellor, and then you've got the Reichstag, which is down here. So the president, and I've done the one who was in charge for the longest time there, that's a drawing of President Hindenburg. Google images him, and you'll see how amazing my drawing is there. He was elected every 7 years, was a president. Their job was actually, they didn't do a right lot. They sort of stayed in the background. The job of the president was to only step in, really, if there was an emergency, if there was a crisis in Germany, and also to choose the chancellor, who would actually do a lot in the day-to-day running of Germany. Whoops. So the Germans elected Hindenburg. He was a famous general from the First World War. And you can see him there holding Article 48, because when they wrote all the rules about how the Weimar Republic would work, the 48th rule that they wrote, so Article 48, said if there was an emergency, the president doesn't have to ask the Reichstag, the politicians, to vote on something. He can just decide, well, we're going to have to do that because it's an emergency. So I'll give you an example of that. This arm's aching, so I'm swapping arms. Let's say there was a huge economic crisis and Germany doesn't have enough food. What the president might have to do normally is he would say, right, I elect that we use some of our gold reserves to pay for some food from Russia. And he would send that to the Reichstag. They'd have a vote on it. It would take a few weeks. And eventually they'd hope to get 51% of people to vote. That's all right. President can do it. It happens. Job's a good one. But that would take weeks and people would be starving. So the president would say, well, actually, it's an emergency. These people are starving. I'm just going to use Article 48. And we're going to buy stuff from Russia because that's what my job is, because I'm President Hindenburg. Look at my lovely tash. So one of the other jobs he's got, apart from ruling an emergency and sort of sitting in the background and combing his tash, he's got to choose a chancellor. Now, I've drawn here von Papen. Again, look on Google Images. It's an absolute masterpiece. That does look like von Papen, who for a while was one of the chancellors of Germany. He was chosen by the president. It was usually from the party in the Reichstag, which had the most politicians. And he was in charge most of the time. He was the one who would suggest laws to the Reichstag. He was the one who would make deals in the Reichstag with different parties to try get laws to pass. In the day-to-day running of the Weimar Republic, in the years when it seemed to be popular working in the 20s, he, not specifically him, but the Chancellor, he's just one of the Chancellors, was very, very important. Not an emergency, though, it says there, except in emergencies. In an emergency, he was supposed to step in and do his business. Now, then you've got the Reichstag down here. You could think about, like Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament in England. Well, the Germans' version of that is called the Reichstag. This is where the politicians in Germany, who've been voted into power, this is where they would go to work every day, as it says here, and they would argue with each other, and they would attempt to get laws passed. And the big problem, so we're going to come on to some of the weaknesses. This green bit, although you're probably not going to be able to read it, you'll be able to listen to me. This is the most important bit. And you can see these weaknesses on your student working document or on the PowerPoint. One of the big weaknesses is the Reichstag. Basically in Germany, if you earned a certain amount of votes, you would get a certain amount of seats. So let's say there were 500 seats in the Reichstag. If your party won 5% of the vote, what would you get? 50 seats? Is that right? Yeah, you get 50 seats. And there were loads of different political parties in Germany. So there was lots of different people who disagreed, trying to work in it. In this country, we've only got a few political parties. Boris Johnson has got loads of conservatives in the government. When he wants to pass a law, it largely gets passed because he's got so many people in government. In Germany, the Chancellor never ever had a majority. They always had, usually they had the most people, but not more than 50%. So the problem was it was really hard. I mean, that might be difficult to understand, and I'll teach you more about when I come in. But the gist of it is, because of something called proportional representation, it was hard to get anything done in Germany in the Reichstag. And this is why the president often used Article 48, even when it wasn't an emergency. So Hindenburg would often do it anyway, without it being an emergency, because he was like, well, nothing's getting done here, we need to do stuff. Now that's a problem, because that makes it look like the Weimar Republic isn't working, and you just need to go back to a situation where one person is in charge, and then stuff gets done. And this is one reason why people ultimately voted for Hitler. Also, many Germans were like, we don't want democracy. We had the Kaiser, and we were one of the most powerful nations in Europe. We've now got the Weimar Republic, and we're in pieces. We need a strong leader again to bring us back to the top with all those other nations. Now, I've just put some strengths down here, just a little bit. Women did get to vote for the first ever time in Germany, and it was very democratic. Your vote did count. But there's some big weaknesses. It's hard to get anything done, to get laws passed, and the president undermines the Republic by just ruling when it wasn't an emergency anyway. Showing that, that sends the message to Germans, well, look, if one person just takes control and does stuff, stuff gets done. So let's just have one person in charge. And there's this fella over here who's going, cooey. Probably don't do that, but he's like, yeah, me, vote for me. I'll get rid of all of that democracy business. I'll be the person in charge. I'll be the strong ruler. I'll make Germany a strong, powerful nation again. That's the sort of message Hitler comes on. He says, this is a mess, so vote for me. Now, your job is you can use a different program on your iPad. You can use a piece of paper. You can use a double page in your textbooks. It doesn't matter. You can just do it straight in the Word document if you want. It's up to you. But you've got to try to use what I've told you. Use the information in the PowerPoint or on the student working document to create, your challenge is to create a better version of what I've done here. Hope that's useful. See you later. Bye-bye.